panel. Can I have apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Di Jenkins.
Anyone else? No.
Yeah, Chris Mary is a little bit tied up at the moment, but she's hoping to join shortly.
Okay, well, fair enough. Item 2, disclosure of personal prejudicial interest. Anyone? No. Okay.
We've got some prejudicial interest from Councillor Chris Evans.
All right.
He's got so we're just he's having a mic problem, but a personal interest just in some of the aspects on his Stalver.
Oh, right. Okay. Then we move on to prohibition of witch votes, declaration of party votes, which is the standard for all scrutiny boards. Next item is then minutes of the previous meeting. I hope you've all read them. All happy? Okay, thank you very much. Then we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting on the 13th of January. Any questions or comments? Any? No, okay. Then we have item 5, public questions. We have none. Then we move on to item 6, which is pre-decision scrutiny of the cabinet reports on the annual budget. Can I welcome the leader, Councillor Rod Stewart, who's joined us here in the Guildhall, and Mr. Ben Smith, who's online with us this afternoon. If there's any, would you like to say anything, leader?
Chair, if it's okay, we'll do the usual thing of Mr. Smith taking us through the technical aspects of the report, and then I'll add political comment after, if that's okay.
That's fine. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay with you, I will speak to each report in turn. I will be as brief as I can, or relatively brief for me. And although the bulk of it is around the budget, I think it's important I draw your attention to the budget monitoring report for the third quarter first, simply to point out that as we've been dropping hints all year, it was getting better, both from the leader's perspective and mine at a technical level, and services are underspent, forecast at third quarter, but note social services are the only ones overspent. The rest of the report sets out, in summary, an expectation that, despite there being a very large contingency fund, up to £10 million would be set aside for an economic growth fund. That is subject to report back to Cabinet in due course. It is reflected in some of the later budget papers, but it is contingent upon a report to Cabinet, which itself was contingent on getting certainty and clarity from UK government as to what we were getting for the replacement for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. But even with my chucking the kitchen sink at contingency fund, I could not imagine spending it all, so there will be a rollover element at year end. In similar vein, I have not needed to allocate all of the central inflation. Cast your mind back, COVID, then post-COVID, Ukraine, energy spikes, £20 million was originally set aside. I wrapped a protective cloak around services and have been issuing the money out. That's going to go down even further as a result of the budget proposals for next year, but I think that is reasonable given where inflation is going. Savings tracker was relatively on track. Overall message, underspent across the piece. Capital underspending will mean that there is a further add to the capital equalisation reserve. And in terms of the summary on capital budget, you know my views. We don't have quite reached for the smelling salts because it's gone over the £100 million mark, but it's still materially short, which from my point of view results in a large amount of money being held back, which enables me to roll it over into the new year. So in terms of the third quarter itself, nothing but good news as expected. As I say, I think it's important that I rattle through that one first because it lays some of the background for some of the other items in due course. Not only core budget items, but in the budget pack, there is a separate report on further cost increases in social services. So I wanted to get that into the mix. That's all I think I need to give in terms of technical advice on the first report, Chair.
Okay, anyone got any comments about the first, where am I? I lost the page. Right, the revenue and capital budget monitoring third quarter. Any comments? Leader?
Yeah, just to emphasise for those of us who watch these reports every year, it is an incredibly positive position at third quarter. We always see things improve as the year goes on, but as Mr. Smith said, being in a position whereby all are underspending at this point in the year is really, really encouraging. And again, my thanks go to directors and cabinet members for the work that they've been doing to make sure that they live within their budgets. And obviously, if this continues to year end, then we should be in a better than balanced position come year end, and we'll know that in outturn, obviously, in the new year.
Thank you, Rita. Any members? One thing, Mr. Smith said, and that is education and police are underspent by 1.2 and 1.9 million. Do we have any ideas where they are?
The
And why?
The appendix does set out some of the reasons. For place, a large element of it is the receipt of income somewhat deferred under the extended producer responsibility recycling packaging allowances. So I'm expecting that money to be sought for carry forward at year end. Education was equally underspent last year, and it's part of a planned underspend. There was a large underspend on maternity and centrally held budgets for schools, and also a sufficient enough underspend for a £1 million contribution to be made available to the schools at risk budget to offset those small number of schools in Swansea that are in deficit. We're in a unique position in Swansea compared to everywhere else in terms of having schools significantly in surplus as a whole, and I expect that a consequence of outturn will result in a further add to that schools at risk budget for education. As I say, I expect place to be predominantly as a result of the extended producer recyclage and packaging, which will need to be rolled over at year end. So there are explanations for both set out in the report and anticipation on my part as to where they are likely to be directed for my advice to Cabinet come outturn in July. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? That's the case then. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Leader. Can we move on to the MTFP? And
This
Leader?
one, this
No?
I think probably again
Okay.
I'll go first unless the leader wishes to interject. But okay, I'll be brief on this one because the 9th of January report, which you've already considered, which is the combined budget in MTFP, has not materially changed. We had a double provisional settlement as a result of the deal in the Senev, so there are no surprises. The MTFP itself is relatively steady state. The assumptions set out in the MTFP last year when I gave advice on the 9th of January had not changed. The long-term trend is inflation coming down. I do expect pay awards to be more moderated, and all the assumptions I've made in there remain unchanged. You did ask me questions last time. I think you alluded to my conjuring trick ability around moving all the bits and pieces around in terms of the deferrals, swaps, and waiting for interest rates to move around the deferred borrowing. They are also in there as before. So there is nothing material to update from what you were told last time post the 9th of January. So I don't think I need to labour the point here. I think we can probably save most of the time in terms of my technical advice for the more juicy items on the agenda, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Any comments? Well, I got a few. On the Professional Council 26, 27, it says an estimated £50 million deficit, or the, well, let me get the page. It's to do with the borrowing requirement. Now it's increased this year, but it looks as if you're looking at your pay, looking at the forecast, it's likely to go up again next year. Is that correct?
Yes, for several reasons. Don't forget, I've given consistent advice that the £7 million worth of LGBI, the Local Government Borrowing Initiative money, the £28 million gross for the Mumblesea Defences, the CRMP scheme, have both been deferred. All of the existing £50 million worth of headroom has also been deferred. It has always been the case that all of that is factored into the MTFP going forward. And in addition, you have reports in front of you on both revenue and capital that propose a further £50 million up to of either capital spend or capitalisable expenditure through a capitalisation direction, which itself would be subject to further borrowing. So you should not be surprised to see the inexorable climb up in those borrowing anticipated costs, because my position has always been to try and defer for as long as possible, seek to use the capital equalisation reserve. But of course, some decisions were made last year at council to use some of the capital equalisation reserve, not huge amounts, but some of it. And the current outlook is there may be one or two more base rates to come. I have consistently given advice I expect to start externalising all that debt once base rates got to 3.5%. They're getting close. They will cross that boundary this year. My difficulty, Chair, will be that those longer term yields which drive PWLB rates are a lot more sticky. But I think you're going to see me getting to the point of trigger. Whilst I've always indicated I might not need to borrow for quite a long period of time, I do have to anticipate that at the moment interest rates are likely to come down 2 more times this year and then it looks like the trend is going to start ticking back up. So I may be in the spot where I have to, for both interest rate levels and for cash flow levels, start to externalize a significant number of already on the record deferred debts. And there is an assumption and presumption in front of the papers in front of Cabinet on Thursday, and if they stack, it's going to council, indicating permission for up to a further £50 million worth of borrowing on the general fund. So yes, you can anticipate lots more cups being swapped around by me in all of those areas, is the short answer.
Yes, I suspected so. If on page 20, on paragraph 28, following you, it's in the marginal increase in the general fund capital program, and this is the supported borrowing of 301,000. It's just above the core commitment. That seems to be an awful low amount from the Welsh Government.
It is what it is. For many years, it was 12 million, which funded 3 lots of 4 million across disabled facilities grants, building maintenance and highways. It has in recent years crept up to 40 million, but it's absolutely the case that the vast majority of any borrowing is so-called prudential borrowing, which means the council takes its own view as to whether it can afford it fully itself out of its revenue budgets. It is not predominantly now funded for underpin through the capital financing element of revenue support grant. So you're absolutely right. It is a small amount. The vast majority of all capital borrowing done by this council and any council is unsupported borrowing, not underpinned by the core allocation set out in that paragraph.
Yeah, okay. The short-term borrowing requirements of 27, 28, it seems to be quite substantial in the short term, the amount of borrowing. Is that correct, or are we actually externalizing it to a longer term?
So this is the rub. My preference is always to match the borrowing to the length of the asset. If I'm building roads or buildings, I try to go for 40, 50-year money. And of course, back in the 2018s and 2021s, when this punk got lucky, he was able to borrow at 1%. The problem at the moment is if you borrow short term from the PWLB, it's well over 4. That's for a few years. You can get some preferential money occasionally from Welsh Government at 2.4% for some regeneration programmes, but the vast majority of all that long end borrowing at the moment is still above 6%, and I do not like 6% when I borrowed a whole lot at 1%. You will recall the advice I give, which is whilst parameters are set by Cabinet and Council, the decision on when to pull the trigger at any point in time is mine, and it will pain me if I ever have to borrow at 6% when I was able to borrow hundreds of millions at 1%. So the short answer is I'm going to probably have to go short for a period of time and then play it long when I like the look of what's in front of me.
Okay, and again on paragraph 48, the strategy for addressing future savings requirement. There's a lot in there, and there's a lot, on the transformation program, and you've actually put in some big figures in there. And I sincerely hope that, and I think you hope as well, that those figures can be achieved by the transformation program. I think
yes, absolutely. I mean, they are sizable. They're not massively more sizable compared to previous years. I do indeed have to hope they are all deliverable. They are at least in the 9-10 different specific strands, which are subject to a full oversight of the Transformation Board, which has oversight of Cabinet as well as CMT. And they're not just like some large public bodies do, which just assumes they're going to make a 2.5% efficiency saving as a result of generative AI and a whole raft of other things. They are at least ascribed to specific real things, but I share your comment and note that yes, they are more than tuppence. They do drive a large amount of the transformation savings, or a large amount of the overall savings required, but there is a degree of granularity rather than just a let's hope something turns up, which I've seen other large public and government bodies assume in their own spending plans.
I've got Councillor Mark Tribe wants to ask a question, so I'll leave him carry on, and then I'll finish off after him. Councillor Mark Tribe.
Thank you, Chair. Hiya, Ben. Do you ever forecast, without your crystal ball, interest rates returning to something like 1%, or do you imagine it'll remain between 4 and 6%?
So, alas, my crystal ball is working, I fear, far too well, and I'm absolutely confident they will not return to 1%. I have said repeatedly for a number of years I hoped to get stuff away once base rates got to 3.5. They are coming very close. The problem is it's not just a UK problem. You see it in the US. You see it with significantly with Japanese bonds. They've rocketed up from 0.1 to relatively to 2-3%. I'm not going to get stuff away at 3. I do not necessarily see that they'll stick at 6, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to get any of that long-term money away below 5. At the moment, I can get 10 to 12-year money away for some structured debt in the 4% mark. So we're much more likely, Councillor Tribe, to be in the 4 to 6% range, but I'm trying to hold off for as long as I can, using every pot I've got and every cup and trick available to me to see if they'll drop a bit more at the long end. Unfortunately, every base rate reduction that's occurred so far has been fully offset by an increase in the long-term yield, which is why I've not pulled the trigger. So I'm afraid we're very unlikely to ever get back, bar something awful happening again. Never say never, but I'm not expecting them ever to return to those cheap as chip rates. If I could have filled my boots more, I would, but I could only borrow up to the limit of the then MTFP. If I'd known more was coming through, I'd have borrowed even more.
Thank you, Ben.
think-
Ever wise. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, thanks, Ben, actually, for that. Talking about filling your boots, really, this is what my question relates around that. We seem to be borrowing figures of 50 million all the time. Why are we, I assume that's the limit of what we can actually do with regards to the medium-term financial plan. But with the forthcoming 50 million, if we actually borrow it, depending on rates, what's that actually going to be used for?
So you're right in one sense that this time round, the 50 million is entirely driven by what I think I can afford in terms of the revenue costs of financing it. At the moment, I am prudently assuming it will require a 6% interest rate. I'd hope to get it away better than that. Not massively better, but a bit better. And obviously there's 2.5% minimum revenue provision on top. I am acutely conscious there are a stream of items likely to come through to Cabinet in the coming year, which are predominantly regeneration related. But it is also the case that there are bound to be further asks in terms of highways. There are bound to be further asks in terms of schools costs. In terms of the school outline programme and cost pressures there. So I am expecting a whole raft of schemes to come through, and but it is driven this time round by what revenue can afford rather than forming a view as to how much capital would be nice. It is going to be much more constrained than it was previously, simply because I'm borrowing at potentially 6% rather than 1%, and that is punitively expensive for every £10 million. It might still be the right thing to do for the right reasons, but it's much harder to justify getting all of those away in due course. So that's the rationale for it, Councillor Jones.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay, I the only other thing I would add really is again, I said about the transfers, and that's the method, the proposed savings in coming years. As I said earlier on, they are quite substantial, 13 million in one case. So I just hope that it does come to fruition, because otherwise the revenue account is going to look pretty sad.
The one thing I would say, Chair, is I recognise that a lot of them are on transformation, but the totality of the savings is not dissimilar to previous years' MTFPs, which have been predominantly achieved. So I am satisfied in giving my assurance that they're reasonable and adequate at this point in time. But as we always say, the MTFP is a planning assumption for fun, heavily conditioned on what future settlements are likely to be. Don't forget, I was at 2%. We were told it was going to be 2%. I've reverted to 2%. It's just that for the discussions we're going to have next on the revenue budget, we're in the lucky position of having over 5%. So I'm sure that's the reason why we'll have a discussion there. And to some extent, I can only work on what I've got, which is a 1-year deal. And some of those asks are entirely contingent and dependent on what we might get from whatever way, shape or form UK and Welsh Government is in terms of spending and borrowing and funding envelopes.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Can we now move on to revenue budget 2006-2007? Again, Ben, do you want to go through it first?
Yes, I will need to say something, Chair. Just bear with me. I've written so much stuff in the MTFP. I haven't scrolled down the screen fast enough because I thought we were going to skip past the MTFP because that was the easy one. So I'm speaking whilst I'm scrolly-wolying. So this is the other half of the previous report from the 9th of January. Look, you've read the report. The most important item is paragraph 4 in terms of the opening preamble. Some people will only focus on the savings aspect. It is 12, 13 million, not dissimilar to the overall in the MTFP. But this is in the context of approximately £60 million being added to services, including schools, in case any of you are wondering why it comes to 60 million going in. There is a net material add simply because we were told we were going to get a cash flat settlement. Then cash flat was going to be 2%, then it was going to be 3%, then it's going to be an average of 4. Some of us got over 5. I'm not celebrating entirely. It's great to get the second highest settlement, but it's predominantly driven by population growth, and that population growth comes with obligations to provide stuff to citizens. And that's sort of set out in paragraph 12 around the like-for-like and cash uplift in the overall settlement. I also draw attention to paragraph 15. Whilst the fiscal event, as it's called, on the 3rd of March, is a spring statement and not meant to be a budget, given that lands after all council papers are published, I euphemistically say could cause me some difficulty if there are any changes announced in the meantime. So I'm not anticipating any, but I have to give that caveat. The rest of the report draws attention, particularly in table 1A. We do it in the normal format. Everything that you heard and saw before at Cabinet in January and came post to scrutiny is in again, where I italicise anything that has changed at this point in time. That's the fire levy, the other levies, ups and downs on contingency, council tax, in, out, shake it all about as to what I've got overall. And a finalised assumption on a presumption on the recommendation for council tax as set out later in the report. I am reducing the essential inflation assumption. Paragraphs 34 onwards set out the schools prioritisation, and as a result of that deal in the CENIV, as set out on the 9th of January, £3 million more was added to schools than would otherwise be the case, and it's set out in that table of £12 million plus overall going into schools. The capital financing charges section in paragraph 50 onwards makes many of the same points we've just covered in the MTFP about the difficulty of juggling and balancing it with elevated rates. The rest of the report sets out assumptions, again repeats the current year's transformation savings programme in table 2. The summarised consultation results in paragraph 72 onwards and in the various appendices. Table 3 sets out the changes that have been made as a result of decisions already taken at Cabinet. For example, the last Cabinet made a decision to remove charge for garden waste bags. I was paying attention, so I added them in. There were a couple of other items that were agreed at that time, and I'm topping up sums that had already been provided in the budget. I then do all my technical adds as a result of all the advised levies from the other parties to get us to a net nil. That's relatively straightforward. I draw your attention then to the next part of the report, which indicates that paragraph 120 tucked in there is the proposed 3.90% increase in council tax. I was expecting that to be the second lowest in Wales. I now anticipate that to be the third lowest in Wales because I keep an eye on what's happening in the 21 other authorities. The rest of the report sets out some additional proposals. Paragraph 125 sets out some indications of what additional monies may be available in the budget, and Cabinet is asked to consider, all fully based from contingency because that has to come back to zero. And then in an unusual departure, but it goes back to the point in terms of the third quarter monitoring report, which refers to 10 million. And in anticipation of a report having to come back to Cabinet in due course on what the £10 million proposed may be spent on, I thought it unwise for it just to potentially appear on anyone's slides in council and not having had chance for any pre-decision scrutiny on it. So I've hazarded my best tea leaf reading, crystal ball reading as to what is likely to come to Cabinet after the event, because 10 million's material and is beyond my environment limit. So I've taken a bit of a punt on that one as to what Cabinet is minded to likely do, but I thought it was important you had visibility on that. The rest of the report goes on and on and on about various risks and assumptions. The key ones are we are still at risk on care home fees. You've got a report later on that suggests a further £1.2 million top up to care home fees, because whilst general inflation may be coming down, it may be 2% and a bit, it's 3% at the moment, we'll know more tomorrow. Yes, council tax may be 3 point something. Yes, RSG may be 5 point something, but we've got up to 14% per annum increases in care home fees, predominantly as a result of decisions on national minimum wage, living wage, and the spillover effects of national insurance. There are risks on equal pay, which are flagged up repeatedly during the last 2 years in terms of budget monitoring, and they are still here. I see a number of authorities named at risk, a number who have settled, so I have to put that in the proposals. I've weighed that against the risks of capital or capitalisation expenditure directions. And so I make two modifications to my assurance because I have to overall determine whether it's adequate or not. I repeat, last year council decided to take £2.5 million worth of capital equalisation reserve monies for a purpose of keeping revenue down, not for the purpose intended. I was mildly irritated then, I'm mildly irritated again, but it's lawful, it's reasonable, it's proportionate, and I understand why council wanted to keep council tax lower. This is the second year of it because it was agreed for 2 years in last year's MTFP. And as I say, the other modification is in terms of those national insurance stuff. Last year you had one where I took a punt on us getting 7 million and we got it. It's not the risk to us, it's the wider spillover effects on every supplier having to charge more for NI, more for national living wage, minimum wage, and particularly in the care sector. So that's why both of those modifications still stay in there. The rest of the report goes into the detail in terms of changes, movements, etc. And I just remind you of one other thing, because this will look like quite an unusual year because there's money flowing around all over the place. Do not forget my starting premise on all of this, irrespective of everything else, was I had a long, hard negotiation with my local friendly pension fund Section 151 officer and agreed a 33.33% reduction to this council's pension costs and a neighbouring authority, which has been able to reduce its overall budget ask by quite a significant amount, and those were already baked in. So you see £17 million come off the cost pressures at the stroke of a pen of me discussing things with myself, wearing a completely different hat. I wear an awful lot of hats because several of the other items in the report are subject to me levying you and such like. I have more hats than a strange little man who turns up in a shop that can mysteriously appear on a corner and have some adventures and then disappear. For those of you who are of my age, you'll know I'm referring to Mr. Ben, of course. I think that will do in terms of my dulcet tones. In terms of what's in the report, this is the most important one in terms of its complexity, the pull together, the whole together. So I will pause there because otherwise I shall bore you all to the proverbial you know what. I'll pause there, Chair.
I very much doubt whether you could bore anybody, Ben, with that conversation. And it was Mr. Mann. Over to the leader, because I don't think he can go with your. I don't think he can come anywhere close to what you just said.
No, I won't. I won't wax lyrical as much as Mr. Smith and his dark arts of financial management, but I'm very grateful again to the work that he's done to help us get this budget together. Look, just a couple of headlines for me to sum up what Mr. Smith has said. As he said, you know, the 3.9% proposed council tax within the report is currently proposed to be the third lowest rise in Wales. And again, you know, those above us in terms of the rates would include Neath Talbot across the border, who you'll know are over £200 a year more expensive than Swansea for the equivalent band. So even though we're slightly higher than them in terms of the rise, they remain more than us in terms of actual pounds and pence in terms of what they charge. In terms of the budget investments itself, Mr. Smith has been absolutely correct again. Net £60 million overall, with a net investment of 47 million going in. And again, as in every year, there are always transformational changes and savings that are accounted for, but the overall investment is more money going in than coming out. And that means that we get to a point where we've got record investment in education, social care and other services. In terms of the highways arrangements, the overall infrastructure pot this year is around £37 million, which again is significantly more than previous years. And again, within that, there is a commitment to around £12 million direct into resurfacing and repair works for highways. So again, further breakdowns will obviously come as we get closer to the March budget. Outside of that capital programme, significant investment again proposed for housing through the HRA. May come to that in due course. And obviously the capital programme remains a substantial element of what we do as a local authority. But overall, Chair, a very, very positive budget to bring forward. And as Mr. Smith has said, very, very much helped by the fact that we have been able to take advantage of that lower contribution rate towards the pension fund, because our pension fund is the #1 performing pension fund in the UK, and it is funded to 130%. So even with this reduction, it would still be funded to circa 115%. So again, absolutely right that we take the benefit of a lower contribution rate.
Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back to the highways issue because I think, as Rob knows, we were promised 20 million this year, but only actually about 8 million was actually spent on resurfacing roads from that, according to the Cabinet reports, which went through, plus the £300,000 you added in extra after that. So this 12 million is actually going to be focused entirely on the road surfaces as opposed to pavements, lights and stuff like that. We just confirm that.
Yeah, so again, we continue to disagree somewhat on
Well,
those
if you show
figures.
the evidence.
No, but as you'll know, it's not a static position, and money does arise throughout the year, and there are always grants that we get and ones that we rely on as part of the overall figure. So again, that £20 million figure is close or thereabouts in terms of what we originally said. This year, yes, absolutely, we've tried to be even clearer to say that £12 million is there for resurfacing and repair works of the highway.
Yeah, I think the other issue this year was because of having to recontract all the things. There was quite a delay before that work undertook. So I'm assuming those contracts will roll over to next year. So we'll be able to get the benefits of that money almost straight away into the new financial year rather than having to wait for the contracts to be renegotiated.
Yes, and again, I know the officers are working at the moment to try and ensure that we catch up in year. So the aim, weather permitting, will be for any patch works or small resurfacing works that need to be done that wards are reliant on will be completed before the end of March.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, Mr. Smith, Matt?
I was so enjoying myself, I thought I'd come back in. I wanted to save something just in case the leader wanted to say it, so I'm going to steal his thunder a little bit. If anyone ever says, what did that Section 151 officer ever do for us? In terms of the budget proposals, the more interesting part of the takeaway with all my technical wiffle waffle mumbo jumbo, if you look at the first appendix, you've got education and schools going above 240 million. I'd be staggered if that's not £250 million by the following year. Social services joins the £200 million plus club, and Place joins the £100 million plus club. I'm sure the leader will make that clear in his stuff to Cabinet on Thursday. But all joking aside, those are all significant milestones in terms of clear, significant adds. When, as I say, in some quarters there may be, not suggesting here or elsewhere, but in some quarters, what's the treasurer taking out and what's he being a meanie on? There are some really significant positives in there in terms of the amount of money being put into overall social services, place and education and schools combined. And I think they all two pass a major milestone and one is short of the next major milestone. Gosh, I shouldn't say that, should I? It's beginning me to sound like a politician, so I better stop there. I've got to roll.
I think that may be a good idea then, Ben.
Just I'd come back in on the economic growth fund, the £5.5 million, which is for the local growth fund transition. Do we yet know how that money is going to be spent, or are we going to have a cabinet report, and when can we expect that detail?
Yeah,
so you go leader.
Yeah, so as Mr. Smith alluded to, one of the things that we did not know when we set up the growth fund was what the UK government's plans were for their local growth fund. Confusing, they both got the same names. So what we wanted to do was to try and use our local growth fund to, if you like, plug any gaps that might be there in terms of the move from SPF to local growth fund. We know that in terms of the UK government's position, it is a split which is reversed in terms of 75-25 capital revenue. So again, there are some revenue programs that we would like to continue to fund because we believe they have some really good value. So again, Paul Relf and his team have been working up a set of proposals which underpin why 5.5 million is required. So yes, that will be coming forward in terms of detail as to how that fund is actually allocated and how it's split. The remaining 4.5 million then from that local growth fund will also be allocated in due course as part of the budget.
And just to add, in terms of specific timing, you should expect that to come to the March Cabinet, because I require it to be in place for it to be able to be spent and underpinning from the 1st of April. The delay is because, as the leader has said, we've been waiting for clarity from UK government. And it's why I took the view to put as much as I knew in this report so that you had the opportunity for some pre-decision scrutiny on it, even though they haven't yet appeared on Cabinet.
Okay, anyone else? No? Right, okay. Can I then take you to paragraph 26, table 1A, projected pressures. Now, I know we are putting capital charges up, but you've got projected charges, you've got capital charges, temporary use of underspend reinstated. That's to, I should imagine, that's to the equalisation fund. And then existing schemes, nil. Use of capital equalisation, nil. Use of other reserves, nil. Remove extra capital spend funding by reserve. We are putting the funds, we are putting capital charges up. So why haven't we put it in that list?
So they're deferred into future years. The reason they're in as nil, which may seem a bit inefficient, is partly because there's hundreds of pages being compiled at pace by the same few officers. And if I take a line out, I'll forget to have it in a year when there is an ad. The MTFP budget combined that came on the 9th of January made quite clear that we were deferring previous decisions that are stepping up in the 1s, the 2s, the 3 millions, the reversal of some of those decisions already taken in terms of 2 years worth of temporary highways works funded by £3 million a year draws from insurance reserves, the 2-year impact of the top-up money from Welsh Government for local government borrow initiative. So although you'll see a lot of noughts, it's as much as anything to remind myself never to take them out, because if I take them out, I'll forget to add them back in a year when there are further asks. The further complication this year, as I've made clear, is that there is a potential ask for a new £50 million borrowing envelope. What timing, what decision will depend. At the moment, that is not put in capital financing, which is why they're zero. It is held in contingency. At the point at which Cabinet receives an FPR7 report and decides to potentially support a new scheme, which requires borrowing, I will be getting my trusty Viament checkbook out and looking to move money across from contingency into those capital financing pots. I have not made a decision yet as to when I need to do it, and that's why they're sitting on a different line. Just to confuse you even more, you thought you were keeping up with the 3 cups? He's got a special 4th cup that he's got elsewhere in contingency.
You must have gone to some college to do this, because it is incredibly complicated. I can understand it in its broad sense because of the way in which the budget's created, but that is, you know, I have to say, very complex. Can I then move on to the savings proposals?
Chair,
Chair,
Councillor, I've had my hand up a while, isn't it?
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Mike, I didn't see it. Carry on, sorry.
Yeah, it's a question for Mr. Smith, really. You mentioned game book contingency, but how confident you are that we've got sufficient funds there in regards to the equal pay liabilities that we know is going to be coming down the line? So I know lots of authorities are in the same position, but how confident are you that there's enough reserves there to sort of deal with that? And of course, you mentioned as well about this issue of inflation. That, well, as you know, the interest rates might be wrong, but inflation is obviously will start to go up again, you know, as people keep saying about the prices of things.
Yeah. So there are several things there. I'll come to them in no particular order. I have a core central contingency provision of normally about £3 million. I also top it up by one-offs, and you've just had the budget monitoring that indicates there was £18 million brought forward of one-off contingency. Yes, a very large amount of that could potentially be spent on the local growth fund, but I'm confident there will still be a sizable contingency fund rolled forward, mostly one-off, but with an element of base going into next year. I do expect inflation to trend down, as the Bank of England has said, in terms of headline. I have made arrangements with colleagues in social services, and there is another top-up report that indicates that there is a need to put money into service-specific inflation. And by putting it all into services, I don't then need to leave so much held back in a central pot. The choice of parking the £50 million, which is effectively £5 million a year once I factor in the elevated borrowing costs, is very carefully worded in the report. It indicates it could be spent on capital, or it could be required for capitalisation directions if required. And capitalisation directions are normally for things like major service restructuring, or if it should impact equal pay claims, which would be larger than the level of general reserves, and a number of authorities then have to make arrangements. So I've hedged my bets there, simply because I am cognisant of there are a number of authorities that have been gone after Rightly or wrongly, it's not for me to judge. It's a process. I am a trade union member myself. I respect all rights, obligations, etc. So there is a hedge there. I would also remind you that I already have an existing provision in the accounts for £15 million worth of previous equal pay risks, which are provided for in the accounts. So I cannot be absolutely certain that there is sufficient wiggle room and flexibility, because it depends what comes in due course. But I have in the open accounts a contingent liability for future risks, because a number of councils are subject to claims, and I have an existing provision. So it's my best judgment that it is reasonable at the moment. If I didn't have that wiggle room and flexibility on that borrowing capacity for either capital or capitalisation directions, you would have probably had a third Section 25 assurance modification saying we, like many other councils of our size, face an equal pay risk. But because I've got that covered in the report, I didn't feel I needed to draw your attention and Cabinet and Councils to it as a Section 25 matter. So I think I've covered them all off, but in the wrong order, Councillor White.
Okay, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Chair.
Can I then go on to the risks? One of the things I've noticed on the risk and uncertainties, for the want of a better term, is overspend, underspend. Yes, it's this care home fees, and it's quite interesting because I know social services have got an issue about this as well. And I noticed that what you put in, it's the wording is quite ambiguous in many ways, but it must be robust and evidenced. Home producers to be robust. See specific provision. Do you think that that inflation figure is going to be sufficient? Because I think, you know, we all know that care homes have got real problems, and the fact that with the living wage going up, national insurance, the costs have gone up. So I think that is a very, very risk which is very, very apparent anyway.
Yes, you're
Ben?
right. We have had claims made against us in terms of prior years, which you'll be aware of in terms of social services. I go back to the point I also made, whilst I target as much inflation and uplifts as possible to social care for national living wage, minimum wage, and some of those contractual price increases. You've got my second Section 25 assurance issue, which is the interplay of national living wage, minimum wage, in particularly low wage sectors with part-timers, and the impact of national insurance does have spillover effects, particularly in social care. And although you wouldn't ordinarily refer to the other reports on the same cabinet agenda, the fee setting and charging item on social services later on the same cabinet results in me giving advice that cabinet needs to recommend to council a further £1.2 million be added to social care on top of all this, precisely because of that. Yes, we may get a revenue, we may have council tax at 3 point something, revenue support grant at 5 point something, inflation is currently 3.4, it may be down to 2.9 or 3 come tomorrow's publication, but we are facing in that later report up to 14% increases in social care, and those are evidenced and reasonable in my view. So I'm having to top up left, right and centre. Is it enough? Who will ever know? But that's pretty meaty. And going back to the analogies and the gentle ribbing you often give me, yes, I do like being told I'm a little wizard now and then, but be under no illusion, and I shall repeat this to Cabinet and Council, my illusions are more of the street conjurer variety or stage illusionist. I am a lapsed economist, practicing accountant, but I am not an alchemist, so I cannot turn it all into gold. All I can do is move the cups around. So I think you're right to flag it. I, on balance, despite my jocularity, feel it is reasonable in overall terms, but the pressures on social services are going nowhere fast. Absolutely, Chair.
Thank you for that. I wish you could turn it into gold, but there we are. Going on to the several proposals, Ben, we have Appendix D, Part 1. I'm going to ask a question now, and this applies to a lot of the savings that you've put in here. Are they actually savings or increases that go into the core budget? So they are savings, and as a result, the increases go into the budget, and you've put them down as savings, but in effect, they're an increase in the charges.
Yes, absolutely. A whole raft of them are quite clearly described as increases in charges, which are
Okay.
reasonable and proportionate. I've given advice to my CMT colleagues and advice to Cabinet that they should have due regard to the levels of prevailing inflation, but also service specific inflation. So there is a mix and choice to be had about what is service specific versus how much should be raised through general taxation. So yes, it's a fair point.
But I will be asking at some stage in the future, because the difference on this, oh, hang on, what's it called? The table part 1, appendix D, if you go down to a place, there's a couple of things which the street works and licensing fees annually for 3 years. They're 25,000. Now I'm assuming that's 25,000 over 3 years, or is it 25,000 each year for 3 years? Increased charges, income from the marina and NABROC in line with market conditions for 3 years. Again, that's 20,000. Is that 20,000 per year or 20,000 over the 3 years? We're going to have an income from parking enforcing camera car. I'm assuming we are purchasing a new one. The fees on building control and planning are set by the Welsh Government anyway. I am disappointed to see increase in fees for burials and cremations and increase in fees for registrars, because added together, you know, that's a considerable. I understand that, Leader, but if you let me finish first on this one. Pest control fees to schools, contracting jets, you know, that's just £2,000. So, and the service restructuring for bereavement services, 14,000. So again, you've got that. But then the next line down is the deletion of a vacant post in registration. So we've got an increase further up, which is, what did I say now? 36,000. And then we got a reduction of 38,000. So you know, that's, is it one or the other? You know, that's yeah, possibly, you know, so all in chart. Oh, there's quite a few in there, but I think we'll put them in the letter to you as well. There are quite a few other things: increased parking fee income, renew natural conservancy fee income, capital projects, etc., etc. There's a number in there, Leader, that I think is probably better if we put in a letter to you then I carry on reading them out over the next half hour or so.
Chair, if I may just come in with a couple of points of principle, I guess, on this one. So you're quite right to draw the distinction between there's a mix in there of income additions as well as general savings. Those are related, some of them, to our transformation program. So as you quite rightly say, there will be occasions whereby we may delete a post in one area but create or invest in another. That is about how we transform and redesign services. So there is a bit of that going on. Also, in terms of fee increases, they are generally set at around a set inflation level, or a 5%, I think, was the fee rate for many of the services. There are some business sensitivity increases around there, which are ones whereby the market dictates what the appropriate increase is. And you've alluded to some of those in the papers as well. Just on the crematoria, again, we know that the crematoria fee is a small but important part of a funeral cost, because obviously the majority of funeral costs lie elsewhere. However, there are changes that are being proposed for crematoria in Swansea, and that is around the fact that we've previously operated a half-hour system of bookings at the crematoria. Through feedback with the public, the view is that 45-minute slots would be more appropriate to allow families the time to gather outside after the service and for that proper changeover between one funeral and the next. So therefore, obviously, it's a longer period as well that people are basically purchasing the time in the crematoria for. In addition to that, obviously, it's a very competitive market at the moment in terms of not just operators on our doorstep in terms of other crematoria, but of course the online operators who are offering remote funerals and remote crematoria who can also offer a service. So it is a very competitive market, and we're mindful of that in terms of the market sensitivity. But the key driver for the change here, I think, is the change in terms of time slots that we're also offering for families who are undertaking services at the crematoria. Mr. Smith may wish to add a bit more to what I've said.
Ben?
It wasn't specifically about the cemeteries and crematoria. I think that's the note we've had back because I anticipated there might be some questions on that, Chair and Leader. It was more a general point. Yes, please, if you can put your list in letter so that we can raise with the relevant directorates. But it was just a general point. If it says in one of those lines that it's a 3-year increase, for the avoidance of doubt, we are talking only about the 26-27 budget. So you would have an entry only for 26-27. You'd have to read it in conjunction with the previous MTFP one for years 2 and 3 because they are split out. So if it says it's a 3-year figure, if it says it's 3 years, it doesn't mean the column is a 3-year figure. That's a 1-year figure because that's only the 26-27 budget. You will see a number of them that then have spillover effects into the following 2 years, which were set out in the MTFP we've already discussed. So it's just a general point on the technical advice. But yeah, I'd rather not try to answer amateurishly questions on each of the service specific ones, but I'm sure you'll give a list which we can share with the relevant directorates to give you a further commentary and assurance as needs be.
Yeah, I think because there's quite a number in adult services and child and family that would like to ask, but I take the point that it'd probably be far better if we put them in a letter and send them out. Okay, that finishes my on the savings. On the service pressures and investment part 2, quite interesting that the transformation funding is 1.3 million. I thought that might have been a little bit more explanation on that. Licenses, the corporate licenses for oracles, 432. That again, I'd like to see how many that was. There's a couple of advisors being employed by at 5,000 per annum. So there's a few things there which HR and the service centre, which I think could possibly do with a further explanation. But I think we may have to put that in a letter because I don't think it's necessarily right to ask you now to answer those questions. And that includes the investment in the core, 1.5 million. Is that? I'm assuming that's to have a further increase in the number of people working there in case of those issues. And I think, to be fair, I think the one thing I think we all councillors would welcome is the fly tipping enforcement, an increase of 250,000. I think every one of us, everyone, and some people with more diverse wards with far more open space than myself will obviously welcome any more money to be used to catch these people that are destroying our environment. I think that's it for now. But as I say, we will put in, I think, put in a letter some of the issues of the year. One thing I do notice that the home to school transport budget costs keep on going up and up and up and up, and there's very little anybody can do about that. And I think that's it really from me. If there's anyone else who's got any questions? No? Right, okay, thank you. Can we move on to the capital budget programme now? Mr. Smith?
So I shall speed up. This is a very minor report. It's only £650 million and £650 million worth of funding. draw your attention to the significant amounts of assumed borrowing required, both longer term but also that short term bulge we've already been talking about all of this afternoon. I don't think I need to give any further advice, but I anticipate there may be some individual items you will want to ask questions on, and I may plead the fifth on the basis I don't know what the answers are. So again, there may be follow-up questions in terms of the letter. But I don't think I need to give any further advice on the overall, other than to say at a technical level, from your Section 151 officer, I think 650 million quid is a very big number, and I'm sure you will agree, but I will attempt in conjunction with the leader to answer any on the specifics, but some of them may be in your follow-up letter. That'll do on that one, I think, Chair.
Are there any questions on this? Please tell me yes, because it's just the only thing I would suggest, Ben, is the fact that on table 2, capital financing, it's sad to see that the capital receipts are so low. Mind you, I don't think we got much else to sell. I think we got rid of the family silver many years ago. Revenue contributions this year are quite high, but it's the unsupported borrowing requirement of 56 million is substantial, but it's actually going on to 2030-31. The additional costs then are 4 million. I suspect that will raise as time goes on. But I think that's the issue that really is the important thing, is how much is it going to cost to borrow this money, and when are we going to, because we reached the tipping point now where the costs of borrowing are more than the transformation we did a few years ago. Councillor Ben.
Chair, just for you, Chair, if I could add to that, I think I've got to correct you on we've sold the family silver. I don't think I can let that one stand. I think the reason the capital receipts are low at the moment is because we don't have to sell anything at the present time. There aren't any disposals required. There are some transactions around some strategic investments in the new depot, which allows us to dispose of Pipehouse Wharf, etc. So there are some strategic decisions being made there. We've decided not to demolish the civic centre, but to repurpose it. So there are lots of things that I think could have potentially been capital receipts, but are being delivered in a different way. Obviously, in terms of the outline borrowing requirement that we may have in future years, Mr. Smith has said many times he will defer as long as he can. And again, if we continue to make money off our investments, then we'll continue to earn income, which may lessen our ability or our need to borrow. And of course, we are continually pursuing grants and other funding streams from UK government, Welsh government and elsewhere. And obviously through our arrangements with Urban Splash, we will be looking for institutional investors to take on some of the heavy lifting in the city centres. All of that taken together are other ways in which we can still achieve this without having to significantly borrow additional sums all the time. But there is that opportunity to borrow. We will still need to do that for the ambitious schools programme that we have coming up, which will be circa 400 million total, with a contribution obviously from us. The other thing, I've got to commend Mr. Smith. He hasn't mentioned it today, but he has, as was alluded to in council, taken out strategic short amount borrowing or small amount borrowing, where he substituted some of the expensive debt for offers of cheaper debt. I think several amounts of 20 million or so, I think he mentioned at a recent council meeting. And I'm sure Mr. Smith will continue to do that when he sees the opportunity to reduce the costs of borrowing where cheap borrowing comes along and those opportunities arise.
Thank you, Leader. I think everybody would do that. Okay, have we got any questions? Or Councillor Jeff Jones?
Yeah, what the leader actually said then with regards to what we expend or what we invest and so on. Are there figures available with regards to income versus expenditure, on our investments?
So
yes,
you,
there are.
yes,
Yeah,
you'll get the annual Treasury Management Policy Statement for consideration direct to Council, along with the half-yearly report and the previous year's outturn report. In there, we set out our entire cash investments, the rate we make on it, and the structured debt we have as a whole. So you do get it. Unfortunately, it's like 2 items before the end of council. So the items I always say, these are the really important ones with all the rocket fuel and rocket science in that are really complicated and boring right at the end. But get it right, you make millions, tens of millions in some cases, as we've seen for several years. Get it wrong, it gets very, very expensive. So you will have a direct report due to council. It's about 50, 60 pages worth of stuff. There's lots of nuggets in there, but you have to have the constitution of a saint or be an accountant to be bothering reading them all.
Yeah, thanks for that. So it actually drills down to each investment then, or?
To a degree, it does tend to list individual ones. I mean, our investments are not exotic, don't have any crypto, not that I can't think of what I'm thinking of in particular. I'm very limited to what I can do in terms of, other than I've got to do sterling, it's got to be an authorised deposit taking, other local authorities, etc. But it does provide sufficient degree of granularity on who we deal with, which counterparties, because I'm a wholesale counterparty in the London money markets, and doesn't go into the list of all of the details of the individual loans the other side, but I've been asked repeatedly a number of questions in council where, because someone has asked for it, I've given them the jumbo spreadsheet in an appendix listing every single loan to the year dot, which I think at the moment runs to 2077. That's where I'm thinking in terms of where I'm dropping some of the money in. I don't anticipate and plan to be here in 2077.
I'm not sure about that. You did give that spreadsheet. I think a question from either Councillor Peter May or Councillor Stuart Rice some time ago, and you
yes,
did
a couple
show,
of times they've done it, Chair. They've asked a couple of times just to keep me on my toes.
Yeah, and it did go on to an awful long time, and it did show various investments like buying a warehouse somewhere and getting that the capital, the return from that. Councillor Batt.
Just a quick one. On Appendix C Skyline, does the £10.2 million include all the land acquisition costs, or is that under a separate heading?
No, it's all bundled in together, and it was one of the
Right.
ones I anticipated. The land acquisition costs in terms of what the third parties might have asked for, plus permissions in the exempt report for the connectivity costs, are both in there. So you shouldn't read that as being just the Skyline entry. It includes the other associated costs, Councillor Black.
Okay, thank you.
That's why it's grown.
I'm sure there are plenty of other questions, but I can't. But it would. I'll put a load in the letter, I think. Have members got any other questions on the capital budget? No. Well, thank you very much. Can we then move on to, where's my list now? We now move on to housing revenue account.
So me again, unfortunately. HRA is an important one in terms of the revenue account. You'll recall last year, much discussion in scrutiny and in council. This authority, like all other local authorities with a housing stock and registered social landlords, were facing some significant risks of costs as a result of Welsh Government legislation. So I slapped on the reverse thrusters, gave statutory advice and said that you had to top up reserves and scale back some of your capital spend. This report updates it to say that risk has gone away. The court case has been won definitively by the registered social landlords and interested parties such as ourselves. That enables me to reverse thrusters entirely on the reserves build-up, and then goes further and starts to plan to draw down those HRA reserves, which was always the original trajectory. It enables two things to be done on top. It enables there to be a material increase in the budget for repairs and maintenance, because in the budget monitoring you saw it was going up to £8 million overspent, now back to £6 million. So there is a material increase in repairs and maintenance. And there is an addition to the revenue contributions to capital to help accelerate, when you come onto the HRA capital report, some of the planned high-rise works, being able to deliver them more rapidly. It enables money to be added back into the capital programme. So I know there were vexed concerns last year when your evil, nasty Section 151 officer said I needed to have enough money just in case those risks went against us. They've gone. I went into reverse thruster mode. I'm now reversing, and overall have intervened in discussions with my colleagues in housing who take the lead on all of this, in terms of giving my assurance in similar fashion to the general fund that the reserves are adequate and the estimates are robust, by making sure that there are significant top-ups to both repairs and maintenance and that additional contribution to revenue capital outlay. So I think I can stop there.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions? Leader?
Chair, if I take capital and revenue together, if that's okay, because obviously they're linked with the HRA, turn that into pounds and pence, it's about 70 million going in this year, around 267 million going in over the next 4 years. As Mr. Smith said, given that we had to throttle back to manage the risks that we had at the time, this now sees that going forward, or another circa 13 million or 12.7 million going in for more homes. So again, really pleased to see that going forward. I know Councillor Black has asked previously around some of the things that were being held back being reinstated as quickly as possible, and that this does that. It also allows us to do a lot of the remaining blocks at the top of High Street in terms of Cross Street, Griffiths John Street, Klein and Jeffreys Court. So all of the stuff that I think would be priorities for members to see done in terms of our housing stock made possible by us being able to resume normal operations.
Thank you, Leader. Any questions on the revenue account? No? Okay, can we go on to the housing capital and budget programme?
So to some extent, given as the leader said, we're covering both reports in the same item, I'll just repeat what I said on the general fund. It's a big number. It's 320 odd million pounds, and it's set out how it's spent. I think we've covered it in the previous advice, but I'll be guided if there are questions, Chair.
Okay. Are there any questions on the housing capital account? No? Okay. Well, can I thank everyone for taking part, and can I thank you, Ben, for your, again, expert wizardry on this, on the financial issues that this council has, and can I thank the leader for coming and backing you up, because I think yesterday he was trying it, I think he did, and can I thank all the members for attending, and thank you all, and again, thank you all for coming. Bye. That's it.